It gives me great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today, Katina Michael. Professor Katina Michael has a background in information technology and transnational crime prevention. And I have so much to say about Professor Michael, a mentor of mine, and so many others, but I will be quite brief. Since 2018, Katina has been a tenured professor with the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence at Arizona State University. She wears many hats, one of which is the director of the Society Policy Engineering Collective. She's also a senior global futures scientist with the College of Global Futures and the founding editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society. And I just wanted to put this out on record that she's also worked so hard on this workshop on SINS for 15 years now. And I really want to acknowledge all the hard work and the brilliance in bringing such diverse individuals together, such diverse groups together to talk on many issues over the years. Over to you, Katina, and we look forward to hearing you speak.
Thank you so much, Roba, and thank you everyone for staying around. What a great last session this was. I think all the co-organizers would agree with me that from Philip's talk right through to just now Theresa's talk, there's been like the same message, but at a different level and scale that's been reiterated with each talk. Everyone's saying the same thing, which is actually congruent in many ways. We're just coming at it from different perspectives, which we would expect with a call to transdisciplinarity. And just to reiterate, this session was the socio-historical origins of securitization. And we saw just a beautiful talk in almost a journal history of one's life, and then trying to make sense and reflect on that. And often that's the hardest journey to do, is to reflect back at our own life and see how that has added to the greater. I loved your emphasis on elders, Jason. In many ways, I've said this before, but I have many elders around me, and in fact, most of them are younger, with some exceptions, and I say that with pride. One of them is Dr. Abbas, and Jason, you have been there for the whole period, even before SINS was even conceived. So I'm very lucky. And you think you have an initiative. It's not really about the initiative. I think we could have been talking about anything, and 15 years later would still be here. And it is about that connection, that connectivity, and the people and what they bring. And each and every one of you have brought something very special today to the workshop. But we're going to go forward here. We announced earlier today multiple times that we are going to go to some level of publication with the proceedings. There's the visual proceedings, of course, which we hope to edit maybe by the beginning of next year, sometime in February, March, and then slowly working our way towards written proceedings. So as a final presentation of the final session today, which has been an amazing workshop at SINS22, coming virtually to you from Hong Kong and co-located with ISTAS22, we have this paper presentation by MG Michael, myself, and Dr. Roba Abbas of the University of Wollongong, titled Uberveillance as an Apparatus of Control Towards Insecurity. I'd like to thank Michael for the conception of the term uberveillance and his ongoing notions of access, and also Dr. Roba Abbas for continually injecting new ideas into this realm and how it may be applied as a concept in the future in security and more broadly securitization. This is a topic that MG Michael has been talking about way before he conceived of the term uberveillance in 2006. In fact, I remember when we first married, he would talk about too much control through technology, and that we think we're safer, but no, technology system is foolproof in terms of security. And so what we do is we try to layer it with more and more security features, and just give people or machines access to greater vectors of attack and threats and vulnerabilities existing in this system, causing insecurity. And we just saw we heard the reverse of that through Theresa's talk, where she said, but she was talking about the person, not so much the machine. So if we layer people with additional machines, or tokens or things that they need to carry or embed or swallow to prove who they are, then potentially we're increasing their insecurity. It's very asymmetric. Key sources here when we look at securitization, it is a process. To securitize is a process. Barry Buzan is someone I studied when I did my transnational crime studies in the Faculty of Law at the University of Wollongong, and of course Weaver and that famous book, which talks about securitization belonging not to the traditional military sort of / terrorism sort of studies. It's not the classical security studies that you'd learn perhaps at King's College London, but it has more to do with international relations and national politics. And we could conceivably label anything a security matter, absolutely anything, just by speaking it out and saying, oh, it's a security issue. We call that a speech act. We label something as a security matter. We start to believe it as such because we can't deal with it within its current context or frame. So we reframe the discussion in an attempt to bring attention to it. And often it's called securitization. It's the process of securitization, heavily political and very much about other processes as well. So securitization theorists determine 5 sectors. And the one that stuck out to me in my master's degree back in 2009 was societal, or what I called in my essay responses, social securitization. So there's economic, there's societal, there's military, there's political and environmental. And to give you an example, in the societal sector, the referent object is identity. When we talk about societal securitization or the securitization of the societal sector, what we're really referring to is the object of identity, someone's identity. And we're not really talking about their personal identity, how I describe my inner self, but how I am as a person in this world, in the earth, as a member of the population, of the global population, or a national population, or a local municipality. But if I was to talk about the environmental sector, in terms of securitization, I could be talking about an ecosystem and endangered species. But again, this notion of counting and this notion of life and identification. So an example of this is proof of citizenship. Attempts to securitize citizenry has meant that individuals have had to be identified as belonging to a nation state. And as someone who's traveled to America on visa, I know the process 2 times in a row, and at the moment going through a process of permanent residency, and hopefully with a green card not too long after that. There is a process, and you feel uncertain actually until you get those certificates and those documents that make you a non-alien. You're native, or at least you can vote. You have rights in that country in a different sense, and they're more equal than what it was before. So identity documents have been used to determine proof of one's citizenship and in issuing necessary welfare and other support services. Currently, I'm being taxed at the highest threshold because I'm not a citizen of the USA. So 4 components to securitization acts include the following: a securitizing actor or agent, that's an entity that makes the securitizing move or statement; an existential threat, an object or ideal that has been identified as potentially harmful. And many of you today spoke about that intensification. You know, Professor Karagiannis, you talked about this as an existential threat. What is that object? If I say, oh, it's really imminent, it could be really harmful, there's great risk if you don't do this, or it's great harm to you, and we need to minimize the risk, then it becomes almost an existential threat. The referent object, an object or ideal that is being threatened, for example, your identity, and needs to be protected. You know, we see this with genocide, we see this with refugees who have to leave their country to escape hunger or discrimination, or much worse. And then there's an audience, and that audience is actually very interesting. The target of the Securitization Act that needs to be persuaded and accept the issue as a security threat. Who is that? Is that, you know, which side is that in a country that's war-torn, for example? But here we won't go to that area in this talk. We will simply talk more broadly. We don't necessarily, when we're talking about identity, have to be in a situation where we're in a conflict zone. We may well be in the middle of what is known as an act of God, a tsunami, as we'll see on the next page. So large-scale events like the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004 killed 230,000 people. It devastated parts of Indonesia and Thailand and Vietnam. And the importance of identification here is in the provision of aid and support to survivors and affected families. Interestingly, though, when I was studying this back in 2004 and e-passports were coming out, I could have shown you many pictures of people who had perished in the tsunami and had been placed in bags, forgive me for the descriptions, and just thrown into pits so that they wouldn't cause disease as the bodies were decaying. But really what authorities wanted to do was to tag the individual bodies so that at least they could come back to some response by the loved ones who had lost people who had not survived the tsunami. Maybe their families were elsewhere during that time, and they wanted to basically collect the last remains of their family who had perished. And many people said, why not tag those who had passed? And the numbers were so large that in some places they didn't use barcodes, but they used bracelets. There are images back in 2004 of that process. But here, if we just take a step back, with all due respect, we commemorate and remember those people who perished in this unbelievable disaster. At what level of detail are we looking at? Well, this was a large-scale catastrophe. Catastrophic events are usually existential threats or existential risks, but it was the individual person that matters. You know, the body matters. As we heard from Philip about Hannah Arendt, it was the embodiment of the person, right? A person matters. Yes, it's a collective grief when we lose people through existential threat, but the individual matters. And so this going up from, you know, we talked again with Professor Karianis has talked about the micro, meso, and macro during this presentation today. But it is this, at what level, where are we? We're constantly going up and down, actually, depending on the context and what we're attempting to better provision. So security is a fundamental human right and requirement. We heard that from Teresa. We desire the security of our person against injury, security of our capability to provide for our families, security of income linked to needs, food, water, clothing, and shelter, and much more. Most also hope for security of a way of life that is fulfilling and pleasant and peaceful. Most of us just want to get up in the morning and have a peaceful, quiet day. In 2003, Al-Qaeda defined human security as the objective to safeguard the vital core of all human lives from critical, pervasive threats in a way that is consistent with long-term human fulfillment. And what's very interesting here is today, most of the world's population is highly dependent, even for basic needs, on large technological systems. Many of these technological systems identify you. Many of these technological systems allow you to get welfare payments or payments that are due to you, actually even to get paid by your employer. And according to the Oxford Dictionary, dependence can be defined as the state of relying on or being controlled by someone or something else. And our dependence on these machines is growing. Our dependence on technology systems is growing, on being identified. And that's where we start to get into some level of asymmetry about the kinds of technologies and techniques that we may fathom and entertain. So, you know, sometimes we might say, oh, you know, the world's population are almost at 8 billion, and by 2050, we will be 10 billion. That was, I believe, the statistic. But in summation here and in closing, if we attempt out of fear to securitize the world's population through technological tokens, of which may take the form of implantable devices or swallowable devices, maybe a pill a day, as was once promoted by Motorola X and the former DARPA CEO, Regina Dugan, we may find ourselves in quite an asymmetric situation, whereby while we attempt to securitize ourselves in terms of societal securitization through some token and saying everyone needs to be identified, everyone needs to be marked, you will have no passage right between one country and the other because of COVID or because of whatever it'll be in terms of context. Then we start to look at control issues, trust issues, issues pertaining to one's identity, metaphysical issues, and quite possibly the loss of security as a result of attempting to gain it. So although there are another 30 slides, I'm going to say that's a good place for us to stop today and to reflect on everyone's talks rather than giving you more, because all I'll be giving you is more of the same and repeating things that we've already shared. But I just wanted to say with that closing statement, and we'll get an opportunity altogether to go through the talk in much more detail when we're perhaps more able to. What an honor to be in the 15th year, and this only happens when people come again and again and again and volunteer their time. I learned so much from all of you. I have, if you see my diary, I think at least 30 pages have been filled today, maybe more. It's feeling rather thick, but I just wanted to say a special thank you and hand back to Roba to close, perhaps.
Thank you so much, Katina. I did want to leave the closing remarks to you, but I thought maybe I'll provide a brief overview of what we've attempted to achieve as part of this workshop, and then I'd love for you to close officially SINS22. So a primary objective of this workshop, and I think we've really contributed to fulfilling that objective, was to investigate the role that technology can play in achieving security of people and place. We explored securitization from the perspective of sustainability, of values, of empathy, from a socio-historical perspective, the human-centered and philosophical approaches that apply through 4 distinct sessions. And we wanted to thank all of our speakers who have contributed to these sessions, to the themes, to the sub-themes. And I did also want to thank my co-organizers, Professor Katina Michael, Professor Jeremy Pitt, Ms. Mariana Zaferakopoulos, and also Professor Kathleen Vogel, and hand back to Katina to officially close. And thank you so much for joining us for this particular session.
Well, I think it's going to be a toast, Roba Abbas, to our security, our friendship, our protection, all the words that we saw in each other's slides, our eldership, our acknowledgement of care for one another, the ability to be positive. Yeah, that's what Gopal said, even though I don't know why he chose the ASU colors, but maybe we're positive there, I don't know. But I celebrate humanity, and perhaps a quick reflection. We have a pit talk coming up on Tuesday that's by a filmmaker, and he wanted to introduce inefficiencies, he said, so that we could slow down. Inefficiency by design, he said, where it matters, so that humans can slow down a bit and enjoy each other's time together, as was noted by you, Teresa, but also Professor Karagiannis, that we've heard you say before, going from the digital to the analog in reverse. Possibly that's a way forward, even though it might seem backward to some people. So I look forward to seeing you in the flesh next time, each and every one of you, and to get a material, I think that's what you called it, Teresa, a social materiality hug, and to say thank you up close, but to end it with more conversations, more joy, and to be continued. So with that, have a lovely night, and thank you for your attention and care.